Stephanie Chan, thanks so much for being here today. And why don't you just introduce yourself and what your
Sure.
organization does? Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a senior living advisor, and I have two companies helping seniors. One is called Home to Home, and I started that in 2007, and it helps families with healthcare navigation, care planning, downsizing and transitions, as well as executor support. And then I have a newer venture called My Care Base, started about 4 years ago. And that is an enhanced caregiver marketplace to help families find vetted caregivers for hire. And we provide a whole suite of post hire support to help family caregivers manage that care.
Okay. Okay. Right on. So between the two of us, we know a few things about incapacity planning and estate planning, and big parts of both of our worlds. Myself being an estate planning lawyer. And so why don't we just jump into incapacity planning? So do you want to take this one? Like what is incapacity planning and how does it come into play in your world?
Well, to me, where we help our clients is incapacity planning is really about thinking about who your substitute decision maker is going to be at a future potential point in time when you might not be able to make decisions for yourself. And while that is an awkward topic for a lot of families to discuss, it really can happen to anyone at any age. And so, as difficult it might be to start that conversation, it's really important at any age, even when you're middle aged, to think about who your substitute decision makers will be. And so, the two main documents that we deal with clients are people when they've been appointed as power of attorney, or people when they've been appointed as healthcare rep, and usually for an aging parent.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, as you're saying, like incapacity can happen at any age, obviously, like anybody can experience an accident or even they might not necessarily even be incapable, but perhaps they are unable to access their bank account. Perhaps they're in a foreign country, or for whatever reason, a power of attorney document can be a useful way to authorize access to another person to make those decisions on your behalf. So yeah, just like you said, there are really, in my world, there are three primary incapacity planning documents. So there's the representation agreement, also known as a healthcare power of attorney in some other jurisdictions. But in BC, the representation agreement permits another person or persons, if you so wish, to make decisions on your behalf and with respect to healthcare. So that includes things like where you might reside in should you require ongoing healthcare services, what kind of food you would receive, and what other types of personal care treatments you would receive. So, and then the second document is the power of attorney. There's two types really. There's the general power of attorney and the enduring power of attorney. The enduring power of attorney, the enduring part refers to it survives the moment that you become incapable, whereas a general power of attorney is less frequently employed, and it's more directed at situations where the granting of authority to another person is for a matter of convenience. So, you're flying to Europe and you're about to close on a real estate transaction and you need somebody else to sign on your behalf. So great, you would grant a general power of attorney, or rather a power of attorney that's specific to that particular transaction. But in the world of incapacity planning, an enduring power of attorney is more frequently employed, and so that's for paying your bills, managing your investments, dealing with lawyers, accountants, and just doing everything of a legal and financial nature. And then the last one is an advance directive, which is also known as a living will, although that term is really not employed much in BC. But the advance directive is where you can set out wishes about the kind of treatment that you would like to receive. So not everyone makes use of an advance directive. I don't know how often you see this come across in your practice, Stephanie.
Not that often, to be honest. I think you're right. It's an underused tool.
Yeah. So I mean, it's essentially it's a written communication to your representative, or in the absence of a representation agreement, directly to your medical treatment providers. But sometimes it's not really the best because there's no guarantee. Perhaps you become incapable. How do you even communicate to somebody that you have an advance directive? and that one exists, like your doctor isn't necessarily going to have it on file unless you had the foresight to provide it to him or her at some earlier point in time. So that is the primary reason why, we're always recommending that representation agreements be put in place, because then you have somebody who's cognizant, who's active, who's able to make decisions that are responsive to the actual situation that has occurred. Why don't we talk a little bit about like the persons who are authorized to make these decisions? So the substitute decision makers, which kind of is a nice term to capture a representative or an attorney under a power of attorney. So if you're considering putting together this documentation, who would you recommend serve in those roles, and what kind of conversations are helpful to have with those persons?
I think there's three main categories that we often see of the type of person that's appointed as a power of attorney or healthcare rep. So generally speaking, you can appoint a family member or a friend. And then the last category would be a professional. And that professional could be a lawyer, it could be a trust officer within a financial institution or an independent trust company. So just dealing maybe with the first two categories, because I think in most cases, someone's usually appointing an adult child or maybe a trusted friend. In my personal case, it will be my godchildren, but usually it's someone very close to you. And so I often advise people to think of three main things, because people, I think, have trouble deciding who they're going to appoint, and there might be more than one option if you have multiple children. So I think what it really comes down to are three main considerations. Someone who has the time to be a power of attorney with the right skill set, and then you want to kind of think about where they live. So just addressing each of those three in turn. If you have multiple children, for example, think about, does one have significantly more time than the other? I think a lot of people assume the power of attorney role because they like the idea of being fiscally responsible for their parents' well-being, and make sure that they're well taken care of and money's well managed. But I see a lot of cases where people go into it really unprepared, and they don't expect the amount of time that it takes. So in the best of circumstances, it's like a part-time job, right? And depending on how complicated your parents' affairs are or their life is, it could sometimes feel like a full-time job. And that's when, those family members sometimes come to outside services like me to help with certain things because they're just so overwhelmed. Skill set, they should be very organized. You want to select one of your children who, has the time and the energy and the skill set to be very organized, someone who can multitask. And then lastly, location, just the nature of the types of things that a power of attorney has to do. It's easier for someone who lives close by because they can visit the house, they can see, as simple as, what groceries need to be purchased, if there's home maintenance tasks that have to be taken care of, checking the mail for bills. So kind of those mundane day-to-day things are much easier for someone who lives close.
Yeah. So, really, this is a caregiver role to serve as an attorney under a power of attorney. And, at the point in time that somebody becomes incapable, they might be incapable for 2 weeks, or they might be incapable for the rest of their life. And so if you have been appointed as an attorney under a power of attorney, how would you approach that? Like if you, for example, Stephanie, were appointed by a friend of yours or a relative of yours, what steps would you take to prepare yourself and to really analyze and choose whether this was an appropriate function for you to be performing?
That's a good question, because I actually have been appointed power of attorney for my parents. So I think one of the things that people can do to help prepare themselves is familiarize themselves with the financial situation, debts and assets. So assets and liabilities, actually. And so what I've done with my own parents is and this might be useful or applicable to other families where the parent might not want to give all that information to their children right now, and
Hmm.
B, it would be a lot for me to remember anyways. And so what my parents have done is they've organized all their papers with respect to their financial assets and liabilities, and anything that I would need to know. And they've told me where it's stored in the house. So if anything happens, I know where to get everything.
Right.
So that's a tip for, just kind of getting prepared without requiring all the information download right now.
Mm.
But basically, you want to know about what recurring bills pertain to the house and what credit cards or bank accounts the person has, where their liabilities are. And those are the main things because as power of attorney, you need to kind of keep all their financial affairs in good standing. You don't want to default on anything.
Hmm.
So I guess that would be the main thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, absolutely, because there are legal obligations that you have as an attorney under a power of attorney, and one of them is to keep strong records, to keep accurate records
Mm-hmm.
of all decisions that were made on behalf of the person who granted you that authority. And so yeah, you really do need to be very organized, and it's something that can take quite a bit of time to properly execute. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean,
And it's
so sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's like managing another household. So one of the
Right.
reasons
Yeah.
why it's beneficial to have someone who lives in the same city or close by is they'll be familiar when say property taxes are due and
Hmm.
when we have to file the empty homes tax declaration. Like they're familiar with all that because they live in the same city or province.
Right. So the situation might be analogous to the person that they're taking care of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. I mean, there are of course, trust is one of the biggest uh, components of a healthy relationship between a grantor and an attorney. And so for persons who do not have somebody like a close person, whether it's their spouse or a trusted child or a close friend who has the availability, time, and geographic proximity to be a good candidate for that role. Tell us a little bit about considerations when looking to hire a trust company or to appoint another professional, whether it's a lawyer or an accountant to fulfill that role. What are the considerations that you would recommend
Mhm.
people give some pause and thought to?
The first one would be, why are you looking to an outside person? So it could be that between your family members, there may be some family dynamics that are sensitive, and so you just want to go to a neutral third party. Um, Another reason is maybe people just never had kids, and so there's no close next of kin to choose from. So those are two main reasons why I see people going to a third party in the first place. And then in terms of consideration, it has to do with relationships and trust. So if you have a lawyer that's been your lawyer for many years, some lawyers will do it, some won't.
Hmm.
But you can always go to a trust company, and usually that's kind of one of their core services is they will act as power of attorney. And with the trust company, um, what you'll find is there's kind of like a professional arm's length nature of the relationship that in some cases could be very beneficial because with a trust company there's a standard of professionalism. There are processes you can trust that there's very good documentation. And what I also see is trust companies, they'll have a little bit of formality around when they actually formally step in to act as power of attorney.
Hmm.
Whereas with family members, I often see it as more of a gradual thing. Like we start off doing little things for mom and dad, get groceries, pay bills, and then that increases over time. So that's one of the differences. Um, with a trust company, you kind of have certainty around continuity. So whoever you're appointing as power of attorney, if you're appointing an individual, you may want to have an alternate because if the person you appoint is either predeceases you or is incapable at the time of acting, then
Hmm.
you don't want them to be the only person named. So if you are naming an individual, I would recommend having an alternate. But when you're appointing a trust company, you have a less concern about that because unless the trust company folds, which is unlikely here in Canada, that there'll be continuity around. There'll always be a trust officer able to service that. There'll be continuity around. There'll always be a trust officer able to service.
Right, right. So that's another consideration too, is like perhaps naming a trust company as an alternate. So if you have somebody close, a personal friend who could do it, but then I've seen this done with a variety of my clients. They have named a professional as a backup. I think the main thing that I'd like to empower my clients with is, again, what kind of conversations should they be having with their representatives? Like healthcare, your legal and financial things. There is that sensitivity around, particularly in the parent-child relationship. Perhaps they don't want to disclose the full nature of their assets and debts, if any. But on the representation agreement side, there's some sensitive healthcare topics, and there's things like, do you want to receive artificial hydration, like an IV tube to get a feeding tube? There are obviously complications there that could arise, and there's kidney dialysis. There's all kinds of end of life treatments designed to prolong your life at a point in time when your body is no longer able to function independently. And there are pros and cons there. And, not everybody's a doctor. So obviously getting a fulsome education on that requires speaking with a doctor and taking steps to educate yourself on that. But, having done that, like, how do you broach that conversation with your representative, and what steps should you take to communicate your wishes?
That is a tricky one. Again, for many families, and kind of an awkward thing to discuss. First of all, in deciding who you want to be your healthcare rep, I would apply the same three factors of skill set, time, and location. Same considerations go in. But I also, because a lot of healthcare decisions are subjective in nature, very different from, just paying bills, you want to choose someone that you not only trust, of course, but someone that you feel has the same mindset and outlook on these topics and would make decisions in the way that you would want, because it's impossible to have a pre-discussion on 100% of what could arise. Like, there will be instances that are unexpected. But what you do want to talk about is, even before end of life, and I think end of life situations and questions that come up around end of life are very important. But prior to that, there'll be issues around, how long do you want to stay in this home? Like, would you want full-time in-home care so that you can stay at home? Or how do you feel about moving into an assisted living residence or a care home? If it was a really nice one, could you afford it, and would you want that? Would you want us to spend what was necessary to keep you comfortable and in the nicest environment?
So what's your budget?
Yeah. So actually, that raises one point that I want to also raise, is it often is beneficial for the healthcare rep and the power of attorney to be the same person.
For that, I suppose for that very reason, because your healthcare choices are interwoven with your financial situation.
Yeah. A lot of healthcare choices have an expense tied to it. And we have seen cases where a parent thought to not favor one child, they would appoint one child as power of attorney and one as healthcare rep. But then what happens is, if there's disagreements, then you kind of get into a bind. If the healthcare rep wants a living environment that's pricey, and the power of attorney is saying, well, no, that's not fiscally responsible, we might run out of money, and so forth.
Is there anything else you'd like to raise on these issues today?
No, I mean, generally, I just encourage people to have these discussions early, as opposed to waiting until there's a crisis, because after a crisis hits, you may not be able to grant the full power of attorney. And so the timing is really crucial of, talking and granting the power of attorney and doing up those documents before you feel it's necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. A ounce of prevention, pound of cure. It really does pay to have this stuff taken care of while you're in a good state of mind. And in fact, it's not legally possible to actually put these documents in place after the point in time when you are incapable. Of course, you need to be able to be cognizant and be able to express your wishes. So, thank you very much for your time, Stephanie. How can people get in touch with you if they have more questions?
Best is just through email, stephanie@mycarebase.com.
Okay.
And if you can put maybe my website and details in the episode details, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll put them in the show notes or in the comment down on the on YouTube. So, thanks so much, Stephanie. Really appreciate you taking time
Thank
to
you, Steve.
have this conversation.
Nice chatting with you.